Good day. This is Clayton Braun with Alliance Technology Partners. Today I would like to discuss troubleshooting long scan times with Acunetics Web Vulnerability Scanner. This is from an actual scan performed against an old .NET Nuke release. We use this in our class as an example for working through long scans. You'll see here it's 11 million and some odd estimated number of requests for a current scan will complete in more than 1,328 days. Now, in all fairness, Acunetics was estimating this based on the initial pages that were being scanned. I think this scan took close to a little less than a week, and that was before reducing duplication and tweaking the scan. Now, this is considered all things equal that we don't have network performance issues and database issues in the back end. And I do want to mention this. Acunetics provides great articles on their site covering this topic. One FAQ from a while back discusses understanding the correlation between response times and the number of requests, suggesting that scanning can take from minutes to several hours. I would extend this description to several days in some cases. It just depends on a lot of factors. Now, using that understanding of the response times for the pages and the number of pages with the number of requests, so we have variations in these pages. Also, there's some development issues that come in there too that should be addressed. An older blog article specifies that factors at play in long response times are, web server performance, database performance, bandwidth and network performance considerations, and then WAF considerations. So if you have a web application firewall, there's some things to consider there that extend the response time or may get in the way of some of the vulnerabilities being tested. And from a more recent blog posting, they add the following to that list, which is the size of the website and the number of vulnerability checks, as well as the Acunetics server performance. Now I go back to that number of vulnerability checks. That used to be not as much of a factor. That has increased. We have multiple thousands of known vulnerabilities that are being tested against. So that does increase the time, and you can break that down. Now, if you're looking for a compliance report, you want that into a single report. Maybe that's not something that works for you to break these pieces down as far as the vulnerabilities you're actually scanning for, or for instance, breaking the site down. Now, they do offer a number of recommendations. One that I just mentioned, which breaking the scan to smaller size. This is very helpful, and saving the crawler data. This is something I mentioned in another video. If you are breaking a site down into pieces, that you want to have your crawler data intact, the entire crawl, and then you can select portions within that crawl. Don't crawl a single portion of the site and then scan. There are parameters that are declared in other portions of a site that affect other pieces. So you don't want to have a partial crawl. You want a full crawl and then scan based on that. Please look at the other video if you have questions regarding that. And then select specific scan profiles. So if you're trying to focus in on specific profiles, which vulnerabilities you're scanning against, don't rescan the entire application for vulnerabilities that were fixed. It's a good suggestion as well. However, that doesn't apply when you're trying to get a scan and report in its entirety. A lot of times you want to get a complete report and you want to be able to get it within a manageable amount of time. And based on the size of the site, that could take longer than you would want. Another thing they focus on is monitoring the average response time. And then, when you're dealing with the average response time, that tells you that something's going on with the site that's taking a while. And I mentioned database performance, and they mentioned database performance as well, web server performance. A lot of times you make requests to a web server, and that web server is then handing that request off to a database on the back end. And you maybe aren't hitting the performance limits on that database, but you're sending a single thread operation in many cases, especially with SQL-based databases. And that can take a while to come back and increase your response times, which then increases the scan time. Something that's helpful, if you go into the knowledge base inside of Acunetics, you'll often see, under knowledge base, there'll be a listing of the number of the longest response times. This is helpful for kind of digging into those pages. Another suggestion they made was to use the scheduler to scan during off-peak hours, and that is a great suggestion. It does help, if you're not dealing with a resource issue though, then maybe that isn't the right fix for you. What I'm getting into is more along the lines of understanding the website you're scanning. So looking for the inputs, understanding the request. Why are there so many requests? Are there duplications? There was another mention that I brought up, which was the number of parallel connections. When you're dealing with number of parallel connections, you can come into your scan settings and you can see under our HTTP options, limit number of parallel connections 1 to 25. There is a set limit at 25 right now. The default is 10. I would suggest ramping this up if you're not seeing a performance issue on the web server based on the number of parallel connections. That will increase the number of connections that are running simultaneously, and thereby, in theory, increasing the speed or improving the speed of the scan. So let's go back. I wanted to also mention another thing, was the development considerations. So when you're working through scans, and you find that certain sites or certain pages are taking a long time to come back, whether it be the query that's being sent to the database in the back end, or the way that the page is structured. Maybe there's a lot of inputs. Developers should consider this, not for the benefit of the pen testers that are internal, that are scanning the site and saying we can't finish this in the window. It's for the fact that you may have other scanners on the outside maliciously attacking your site, and if they find something that could increase the number of requests and then slow down your database or your web server, it's a consideration. It's a finding in our opinion. So you want to make sure from the standpoint from the developers that they understand that large queries or sheer number of inputs or variations can affect not only your time on the pen testing, but also affects how the performance is on the server and the backend database. And that plays into quite a bit. So additionally, what I wanted to point out was from that original report that I showed, this was actually a list of the top 10 or top 11 requests that came back. And we saw files with the most inputs, and we saw that on this one page we had 655,000 requests. Here we had 471,000, and we have actually multiple with 471,000. So this tells us we are looking possibly at duplication. And this is where it's helpful to work with your developers. They could tell you, give you a better idea of whether or not this is actually duplication. I'm willing to bet that this is, and actually we determined that it was. And you see the same thing repeat itself with 361,928 requests. We should use this in our class a lot as an example, and we work through our clients' results to help find duplication. Another factor here, though, is the inputs. And let's say there is not a lot of duplication, but you have a lot of inputs and a lot of requests. We like to go ahead on this scan results page, right click, and you'll see there's an inputs. By default, that's not selected. You see that I have it selected. This lets me look into a specific site and understand that, okay, this is the number of inputs I'm dealing with on this site. Then you could go into the inputs tab and you can get some more details. So aside from duplication, now we start looking for the number of variants for a particular page. And this is where we try to understand and work with the developers to determine if there is some values or some form inputs that don't need to be tested. So if we're declaring a color or we're declaring a style or something along those lines, that regardless of what input we select, it's going to yield the same result. So we work with our developers, if possible, to understand those inputs. And then we can go ahead and specify under inputs a specific input. Now keep in mind, this all comes into play with, are we doing a quick, a heuristic, or an extensive scan? And we cover this in training, of course, where the quick is going to try the first input and move on. Heuristic may try a subset, and then the extensive scan is going to try all possible vulnerabilities up to the number that's set in your number of variations that would be found under your crawling options. Here we have the maximum number of variations set at 50. We like to get all the variations as long as they're appropriate. If we're looking for building a car on a website, we would specify color. Do we need to try all the colors? No. And at that point, there's areas that we may exclude. There is a way to edit under settings XML to specify when you're doing heuristic or extensive scanning to then move forward saying I'm going to try only a single input for this input and then try all variations on the others. We call that selective quick scanning for lack of a better term. But that allows us to reduce the number of requests that are being performed and then increasing the speed of our scan. There's a lot of other helpful tips that we can provide you in our training. It's too long for a short little video like this, but I want to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. Please look for additional videos and other content on our website. It's www.alliancewebsecurity.com. Have a great day.